Hello and welcome once again to White Lotus of Light educational series. And today I am doing part 2 of Shadow Wars, the Luciferians versus the Molochians. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about space, ultra tech, and crypto, and how they relate to this ongoing confrontation that is heating up between the Luciferian faction and the Molochian faction. And so I'm just going to click something up so I have my notes here. So the first thing I want to cover is that, the first thing I want to do is say, put a shout out there to Sam Tripoli. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I had a huge influx of viewers because of that. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all the Tinfoil Hat podcast folks who have come over and joined the White Lotus of Light bandwagon. It's awesome to have you here. And thank you to all my folks who came earlier from other means, and to anyone who's just sort of stumbled upon the channel. Welcome, viewer. Thank you so much, all of you, for making this channel an increasingly successful one. I really appreciate that. And now to get into it. So the first thing I want to discuss is take a sip of this tea, and then I'll say, is there is a concept that dark journalist, aka Daniel List, likes to talk about, that I was skeptical of at first, and I think sometimes he perhaps overextends this particular idea, but I think it's actually a really solid idea, and I think people are making a mistake to ignore it entirely, and that is this idea of X-steganography. And so I highly recommend that you go to Dark Journalist, who is just a fantastic channel anyway, and check out his X-steganography series. But to sum up, right, and I really recommend you watch that, because I'm not going to attempt to prove that X-steganography exists. I'm going to use it as though it does exist in this for this particular episode. But if you want proof, I'm not going to recreate the wheel, and the credit for this discovery, as far as I know, is Daniel List of Dark Journalist. And I think he's right. But to sum up, the idea works like this. The elites sometimes, as we all know, use symbols to communicate with one another in a way that's actually out in the open. But people who don't understand esoteric and occulted symbols will miss what they're doing. And a particular variant on this, which is encoded for the in-group, and perhaps certain other aware out groups, so right, in this case, Luciferians and Molochians, to communicate with one another in a way that, again, is hidden and encoded. And in the case of the X-steganography, Daniel List is of the opinion that you will find X related to what he calls X-tech, or the UFO file. And that is all the hidden ultra tech that it seems is embedded in special access programs and the like through military contractors. And it's been almost all moved and privatized. And that's to protect it from freedom of information requests, and also to keep it in the hands of, private parties who have de facto ownership of it. Sure, the IP might supposedly be, the intellectual property might supposedly be owned by the federal government, but they de facto own the technology because it's right there in it, and it's their engineers who understand how to work with it. And more on that in a second. So, if you believe that this X-steganography does indeed mark this ultra tech in particular, I actually would extend it and say what's really happening is that X-steganography is Luciferians stating that we exist here and this is our faction. What's interesting is Dark Journalist has tied the Trump family to a large degree to X-steganography and X-tech and the UFO file. And again, I refer to Daniel List's work on that. He did some groundbreaking stuff with a Nixon aide who talks about this. And a lot of people don't know that Trump and Nixon were friends. But again, I'm not going to recreate the wheel. Daniel List does a much better job of explaining like the Trump connections, the Trump family with the X-steganography. but he's used some examples of that. And also Trump's uncle, John Trump, was the person within the scientist who worked for, I think it was the FBI, that it might have been a different organization, that got the Tesla documents for a period of time. Because when Tesla died, all of his documents were collected immediately by a government agency. And at least at one point in time, John Trump, the uncle and a physicist, the uncle of Donald Trump, the president, right, was running that, and it may have even been working with Vannevar Bush and the UFO file. And again, I refer you to Daniel Liz's work for the deep dive on that. If you want something that's solid and proof and really diving deep on those subjects, go watch his channel. But I am going to just take as an article of faith, or rather a premise that I'm going to use to argue from in a speculative manner, admittedly. I believe that the X-steganography is the Luciferian marker because, as you will be seeing on your screen now, the sigil of Lucifer has a giant X in it. And then it again has the hooked X, which seems related, right? And comes up a number of times in things relating to Templar, among others. And you can see there's both an X in the middle of the sigil, and then there's a hooked X down below that. And so I believe that X-steganography is actually a compressed Luciferian sigil. Yeah. And that, when I had that revelation and the angels agreed, that to me was like a big breakthrough in understanding. And again, credit to Daniel Liz, because I wouldn't have known a lot of the stuff that I do know if not for his excellent work around that X-steganography. So keep that in mind, the X-steganography, and we're going to talk about actually a section now on finance, because finance is kind of the backdrop or the setup for me getting into crypto. Okay, finance. So Andy Schechtman said the other day on I forget what channel that there's 85 trillion in off-balance sheet FX debt swaps, much of it held off-balance sheets by corporations, and almost all of this comes due in 2023. Also, there's all manner of interest rate sensitive derivatives. And, you know, if you go back in time, he denies it now and says, oh, I just didn't understand them. But Warren Buffett once famously called derivatives weapons of mass destruction. And there's some insane quadrillions with a Q, Q-U-A-D, quadrillions of these things in notional value. The thing is that if something fails in this daisy chain of interrelated securities that back one another up and are rehypothecated and all sorts of shenanigans, if those fail, if the counterparty fails, the notional value can become the realized value, which can cause this cascading daisy chain of debt-based derivatives that just blow up the global economy. And that was indeed something that almost happened in 2008 and started to happen. And then there was a lot of coordination to prevent it from happening. So there are a lot of indications that there is going to be some sort of economic collapse in the very near future. And as I said in a previous episode, we'll see if this one comes true. And if it doesn't, then I will own up to it, I promise, okay? That said, the angels told me last fall, and at the time they were telling me, or last summer rather, at the time they were telling me that it was quite likely that there would be an economic collapse in the fall, but it depended on hidden political matters, right? And that obviously didn't happen. They said that the less likely of the two things is that there would be an economic collapse in the late spring, early summer, sometime between, April and July, right? Someplace in that window, that like 3-month window, that there would be an economic collapse and that it would lead to a lot of conflict between the different factions, and that it would also engage certain things like the angels also predicted gold and silver backed crypto. I wish I had gone public with that sooner, but since I went public, one key thing had already happened, but another thing followed very quickly that I wasn't aware of. And so I'm going to now put that aside for a minute, and we'll get into the crypto more. But I want to focus just for a second, totally related to crypto. And again, is this backdrop. Like many things, that are technological advances. The Molochian faction, which is still dominant in terms of power and will be until it seems March 29th of 2025, at which point sidereal Saturn moves out of Aquarius and into sidereal Pisces. And that is as good a marker as any for the end of a Kali Yuga to me. And I actually have a video that I will be releasing publicly fairly soon that will talk more about this transit that Saturn is currently in through sidereal Aquarius. It just started the 17th of January, 2023. And again, I have another video about that. It's currently being used for an astrology summit that I'm a part of. And so I have to wait until that summit's been done for a while, and then I'll release it publicly. But keep that in mind. So you have this end of Kali Yuga coming up in 2025. I often talk about that, and it seems in March of 2025. It could even be the vernal equinox in 2025. That might actually be the best date for it, but I like that transit of Saturn as a marker. So you have this potential collapse, as I described, because of derivatives and the FX debt swaps and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, like, it's enormous. It's beyond imagination. A lot of these the stuff that's going on in the financial world in terms of the corruption is literally unimaginable, I think. And I don't think there's almost anything other than corruption with a thin veneer of responsibility, and that they don't just outright steal people's bank deposits yet. Bail-ins could very well happen and may very well happen, and you should be aware of that. So look up bail-ins. That's now allowed. In particular, look up what happened in Cyprus when their banks failed and the way they took larger depositors. And that idea was then looked at and said, oh, we like that better than bailouts. First, we'll take the money of the people who are in the bank and give that to the AAA shareholder, like people who hold bonds or whatever, AAA class shares. I forget what they're called, but there's a class of shares that in the event something goes wrong, and also in the event of profit, either way, they're the ones who get paid first. And of course, these things are insanely expensive, and basically regular people are priced out of that class of shares or corporate debt or whatever it is. I forget what it's called, and my apologies for that. But that's what happened in Cyprus, is that they did that bail-in where they just took people's money. So look into that, and that is apparently something that can happen in the US now, and it's even been discussed to some degree. So just be aware of that in this context. So the FTX scandal. This is a class example of where the Luciferians invent something, crypto, right? Crypto is as Luciferian as it gets. Like, it's information, it's technology. It's a completely different form of economic system, right? If you look at the original Bitcoin, it's decentralized, all that kind of stuff, right? Very Luciferian, just as Luciferian as can be, really, in my opinion, crypto in general, but Bitcoin and the Genesis in particular, because of that, it had that ingrained liberty component in it, which the Most High is into it too, but it's one of the big shifts from that Molochian consciousness up to the Luciferian. So, like often happens, the Molochians were like, ooh, we like that. That's shiny, Luciferians. We want to take control of that. And so they do that the same way they do everything else, with like economic corruption and money printing. And so FTX comes out of nowhere. Nobody kind of really knows where Sam Bankman-Fried got his bankroll. And he doesn't really look like a genius. If you have listened to any of his interviews, he's not a crypto genius. He's just a front man. And that FTX scandal, it leads back to Ukraine. And Ukraine is a huge center for money laundering and all sorts of nasty Molochian nonsense. You know, there's all those labs over there that they denied, and then Victoria Nuland talked about them. Just a lot of stuff. There's a lot of human trafficking going on there. I actually know a secondhand report from someone who knew someone who was there trying to help fight the human trafficking. It didn't work, and like, just because it was so corrupt there, and the traffickers would get out right away. when they'd save the traffic victims, and very quickly the victims would be found and recaptured. Very, very horrible, nasty stuff. Very Molochian, right? So FTX collapses, and of course, that's the Molochians' part of their plan. It was just a cutout for whatever intelligence organization and or billionaires, same difference, really, right? And they wanted to not only do all this corrupt money laundering and manipulation of politics that they were doing, where they would give to Democrats would give money to Ukraine would then buy from FTX, and then that process kept going. So in addition to the wanting to do that part of things, they also intended for it to fail. I believe they intended for it to fail to then be able to enact laws around crypto, right? And ones that would be harsh on a lot of crypto, because they'd be like, oh, look what happened. It's all a scam, blah, blah. And you see a lot of people are having issues like, I forget which ones they are, and my apologies if I get it wrong, but it's Binance, I believe, and then the one that the Winklevoss twins own. Those are the guys who made Facebook, and Zuckerberg stole it from them, it seems, based on the settlement they got from Zuckerberg. So those guys then went into crypto, and it's like Gemini or something like that. I forget what the name of their exchange that they own is, but they got into lending like fools and got involved, and it looks like their thing's looking a little rickety, and same thing with Binance. And so I'll leave that to other crypto channels to go deeper into that, but that's all interesting, the destabilization effect that FTX had. And so they wanted to hammer down on the crypto. Now, I think that the Luciferians helped advise and talk them into doing that FTX thing. And that FTX thing, it's still not quite going away. I mean, the media is trying to bury it, but there's a lot of very angry people who lost a lot of money, and they're not going to let it go away. And a lot of the information that's come out about FTX is just actually really helpful to the Luciferian cause, because it draws attention to the corruption in Ukraine, and it also draws attention to just a number of mechanisms that are used by the Molochians to corrupt things. And so I believe that at a minimum, this failure was intentional on the part of the Molochian faction, who clearly ran it with the intent that they would then legislate around it. But I think the Luciferian faction has either taken advantage of talking about it a lot, or they might have even encouraged the Molochians with that second part where FTX failed, because with the failure of FTX, it underwent a ton more scrutiny than it would have if they just kept it going and let it kind of peter out over time. That would have been smarter than just it going bleh, and it went bleh, because it seems somebody pulled the plug. So I believe that it was the Molochians wanted to introduce legislation. So there's this thing called ISO 200, maybe even one more 022, and it and I'll have it corrected down below. And it is a protocol for a number of cryptocurrencies. So, okay, remember how I talked about earlier the X-steganography? So there are white hats, right? Supposedly, there are some who claim rather that there are white hats, which to me, the whole white hat thing and the 17 stuff, I think that white hats is a fake designation for Luciferians. They would be much better called gray hats, right? Gray hats, not white hats. But I believe that, part of what 17 was, I think, was a psyops that, in addition to having, again, it was like a nested psyops. The Molochians were doing one thing. They were trying to smoke out nationalists out of the military and national security apparatus. But I believe the Luciferians were doing something nested on top of that, which was to get out this idea that there was a group out there of white hats who would then ride to the rescue, right? They would ride to the rescue, and you don't worry too much, we got it under control. They dropped a lot of information that was incredibly damaging to the Molochian networks. They encouraged people to think for themselves and critically, and they clearly were at least reasonably liberty-minded, these people, even if I don't agree with them on a lot of things. I'm talking about the people who are actually doing the drops or whatever, based on the philosophy of what you could discern from it. And so that operation, I believe, was to get this idea out there about the white hats. So that way, when the Luciferians take over for the Molochians, the Luciferians will go, we're wonderful. We're white knights saving you. Look at what they've done with banking and usury, right? Everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, we hate that shit. And they're like, and we fixed it with gold and silver backed crypto. More on that in a minute. And, oh, they were pedos. And so obviously we're going to hang those people from the necks to loud cheers, you know? And I'm like, hell yeah, that can't happen soon enough, right? And then there's the they'll say, oh, and they tried to kill y'all with the you know what, right? And the groundwork for all three of those is being laid down, right? And so some people claim that the white hats, again, code for Luciferians, in my opinion, own and control XRP, Ripple, XOM, stellar lumens, and I believe it's XDC. And all three of those, you will know, have that X-steganography. And there's additional information that points to with one of the three, and that's XOM stellar, right? Lumens, light. Lumens is a measurement of light. Stellar, this being, as I've told you many times, is obsessed with space and getting humans interstellar. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an interstellar lumens at some point, you know, say 50 years from now. But so the angels tell me back in August there's going to be gold and silverback crypto. At that point, when they told me that, and I just really wish I had been more brave and said that, there wasn't any such thing. And they said that the gold and silverback crypto would be key to the Luciferians overthrowing the Molochians, and it would completely change the financial system. So lo and behold, Sberbank, which is the biggest, most powerful bank in Russia, is using the stellar lumens Ripple network to tokenize gold. Why are they trying to tokenize gold? Because they want to do international payments to sell their own commodities, especially oil, which Russia is either the #1 producer of oil at this point or is #2 after Saudi Arabia, and has vast reserves and is getting increasingly more powerful in OPEC, right? So Russia wants to sell that oil for gold. It sounds like the ratio they're considering is 1 gram of gold to 1 barrel of oil. If they succeed, which I have no reason to believe they won't, in tokenizing gold and setting up a gold for oil trade, that will break the back of the Molochian system with the petrodollar. Because even though I consider the U.S. to be in spirit a Luciferian country, certainly the Constitution Bill of Rights is, clearly it got captured by the Molochians long, long ago, but especially after World War II, right? So, and I mean, I would say, you know, there was a strong Molochian contingent from the get-go because of the slavery is Molochian. And so there was a weird, like, thing, you know, where those two are mixed, as they so often are. But some people detested it and thought slavery should be gotten rid of among the founding fathers. Like, there was actually a anti-slavery component, but it was a minority, unfortunately. Anyways, I'm not going to go any deeper in that. But so XLM is stellar lumens is actually part of the Ripple exchange, and Ripple, XLM, XDC, and Algorand, and I think there's maybe one other, are the only ISO 200022 compliant cryptocurrencies. Ripple is in this weird state where it's being looked at by the SEC, and the SEC, this is going to be a watershed case, what they decide about Ripple. Is it a security? Is it an asset? Is it a form of money? Like, what is it? Like, deciding the legal status of crypto using the case basis of Ripple will actually, if it's done in a way that causes Ripple to be legitimized, which I think is nearly certain because so many banks are working on stuff with the Ripple network. And you might say, oh no, the banks. Okay, but see, this is the beauty of what the Luciferians are doing. They control all the super high tech. And so they're getting the Molochians, who are using this ancient system called Swift, which is literally like COBOL servers, which is absolutely insane and ridiculous. They're using COBOL-based servers to send these little like email things. And that's the Swift International Bank Transfer System. It's so archaic and rickety, it's absurd. And so the Ripple network is lightning fast. It's like scalable, all kinds of stuff, smart contracts, all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, it looks like it's Luciferian stuff embedding itself in the system. So that way they can just go, whoop, and they control the system. They control it from the technical point of view. The bankers don't know what the heck this stuff is. They don't understand it. The people who have power, they don't understand it. And they can hire people to understand it to some degree, but there's also IP, there's intellectual property that keeps aspects of all that stuff to themselves. And so I believe that this will be part of the Luciferian takeover. Now, it's not just Cyberbank. Remember I said gold and silver would be tokenized or used in crypto, that there would be gold and silver backed crypto, which is essentially tokenization is creating a digital twin sort of a real world material asset. But unlike in the past when there's been trading over digital stuff, it's on the blockchain, so it's an indelible thing. And so it's a very secure transaction. And when you tokenize it, that means that you can then move this token that relates to, say, an ounce of silver or gold, and then that token can be in 1,000 different places on Earth, 1,000,000 different places on Earth that same day, because there'll then be depositories that will be located in major cities that will take those tokens and then extinguish them in return for a physical removal. I'm sure there'll be limits on this. I'm sure there'll be controls, blah, 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 but it'll be there. Gold and silver becoming money again will break the back of the petrodollar and will break the back of the fiat system. And that breaks the back of the Molochians' #1 source of power, which is fiat currency printing, unlimited printing of money. It's over. And it's ending right near the end of Kali Yuga. So XDC, which is one of these cryptos that supposedly is controlled by white hats, right? XDC is linked now to Dubai gold and silver tokenization. And so I'm going to put up a graphic now of the company that's doing it. It's I can't remember the name of it. It's similar to Binance, but it's not. And so that company, as you can see on the screen now, they're tokenizing gold and silver. They're in the process of doing it. And there's other companies apparently that are out there that are doing gold-backed crypto. But these are like really high-level things, especially the Cyberbank, which, remember, there was a sort of soft peg between the ruble and a gram of gold. And then now they're linking a gram of gold to tokenized gold to oil for oil exchange. And now Russia can demand gold and or silver, if they want, from China, among others, to get oil. It's impossible to overstate the implications of this for the financial system. It completely breaks the back of the financial system, and you'll see a tsunami of dollar repatriation as people no longer want dollars because you don't need dollars to get oil anymore. And that's what's been backing the dollar since Nixon broke the gold standard back in the early 70s. So yeah, monster turn of events. Okay, I'm I mean, it's actually bigger than what I'm about to talk about now, but what I'm about to talk about now is even sexier, in my opinion. So, according to Catherine Austin Fitts and other financial experts, quite a lot of critical secure telecom information, especially banking, goes through satellites. In fact, Catherine Austin Fitts said in an interview that she felt that control the satellites is very similar to controlling the sea lanes. Because so much business is done digitally now, or is organized through digital channels, control of space and the satellite shipping, modern shipping lanes, those are her words, like digital shipping lanes, is incredibly important. And satellites are much more secure than underwater cables or land-based internet cables, because those can be hacked into, like physically hacked into. If you don't have a proper uplink to that satellite, you can't then access the data there or move it around. And so it creates a greater level of security. Also, you know, like look at what happened with that Nord Stream, right? There's also been, look it up, there's also been examples of where like Iran was going to back their currency or start selling gold on a burst and maybe trade for oil, something very similar to what Russia is wanting to do. And interestingly enough, now Iran is also looking at, they want to have a gold-backed crypto to sell their oil. So now you're talking about the majority of the world's pretty much, well, I guess Iraq is not in there, but some very significant amount of the world's remaining oil is in Russia and Iran. And so that is just super huge. But getting back to it, the satellites are just really important. And it even seems that certain voting related matters appear to go through secure satellites at times, and more on that later. So Elon Musk. I'm probably going to end up doing, I think, an entire episode of Shadow Wars where I just focus on Musk, because the more I learn about Musk, the more convinced I am that he's part of the Luciferian faction. He certainly is in spirit, even if he's not personally aware, you know, and I definitely believe that Elon Musk is a frontman for a group or a much wealthier power, like one of these trillionaire black nobility families. He's clearly a front man. For who? I don't know. They appear to be Luciferian for sure. So let me get into it. And I know people will say something. I've come around on, because of that, Bezos and Gates are suddenly investing in something similar to Neuralink. And nobody had invested in this except for Musk, and it was like sort of Musk's thing, the neural interface chip, and it was his thing for a long time. And it kind of never really got there. It kind of never really got there. And that's one of the big control tools the Molochians want. So all of a sudden, very recently, Gates and Bezos want to make the brain chip. So I think that Musk and the Luciferians slow-rolled that project, so that way the Molochians couldn't have it in time. Very theoretical on my part, but I think that might be what's happening there. And that's the big criticism of Musk that's really hard to ignore. There's some other things he's talked about, universal basic income. It's possible that that would be something that would stick to some degree in the Luciferian system, that they might have something like that, just because it's more pragmatic than having people be just completely broke. There's that thing I was talking about before about, like, you know, Utah put homeless people into motels and so forth, and most of them got jobs, and it was much cheaper on the system overall. And that's how you sell to a Luciferian, to do charitable type things. So similar thing there. But Musk he's going to put all his businesses under X Holdings. He bought X back from X.com back quite a while ago, and he said, "Oh, I don't have any plans to use this anytime soon. It's just sentimental." He bought it back from PayPal back in 2017, and then now he's doing X Holdings, which he's going to put all of his companies, Tesla, SpaceX, and all the rest of his stuff, including Neuralink, the Neuralink chip, all under this X Holdings. And so just more of that extreme Luciferianism. So there was, if you guys remember, there was rumblings for a while there in November of last year of where Twitter, because, oh no, they're allowing free speech, heaven forbid, right? Heaven forbid there be free speech. And right, the Molochians are very scared of that because narrative control is for them. But you notice there still is, yes, I know there's plenty of examples of censorships. It's certainly not like total free speech on Twitter, but from my own personal experience, it's vastly better now than it was several months ago. It's since Musk took over, it is better. Is it true free speech? No, it's not. It's not really close to that, and I'm not sure I want total free speech unless it's you know, you got to have some common sense stuff. Don't shout fire in a crowded theater, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? There are certain kinds of speech that have always been illegal, illegal incitement to violence, things like that. So that stuff, you know, should never be on there, and or anything else illegal like that, illegal images, for example, you know. And so, like, the point is that, like it or not, it is better on Twitter. Is it perfect? No. Are there people still getting censored? Yes. So, but it is better, right? So when Musk was duking it out with Apple, and Apple was suggesting that they were going to get rid of Twitter, Musk, someone tweeted to Musk, probably a plant that Musk put in there. Someone tweeted to Musk, oh, if they remove Twitter from the Apple Store and the Google Store, then you should just like release a Musk phone. And he was like, oh, I really don't want to, but maybe I will, right? So Musk says that. Now, mind you, it was released quite a while back, which I'll get into this more late, probably in a Musk-related specific episode. But Ars Technica got their hands on something showing that Starlink has phone capacity, right? That it can do smartphone signals in addition to internet, that it has like a literal technological built-in thing specifically for phones. So he was always planning that. And that's been known for a few years now. I think 2021 maybe is when Ars Technica had that. But so Musk has the capability is released, and then he goes, oh, I'd hate to have to do that, Apple. 5 days later, Musk goes to Apple headquarters on invitation from Tim Cook, and he goes, oh, it was a misunderstanding. They definitely weren't going to release it. But look at that situation. Musk wins either way. The Luciferians win either way. You allow Twitter, which means that, which has the greater free speech, and you'll notice Musk got rid of one of the things Musk did on Twitter that's like undeniable is he got rid of a lot of child exploitation stuff. Remember how I said Luciferians hate that stuff and that it's a hallmark of them? Trump also did stuff. You know, like there's a lot of weird stuff around Trump where it seems like he smelled out the Epstein thing and then like he didn't get involved in it the way so many did, but he was like around it, you know, dipping his toes in the pool, and you know, you can't con a con man kind of thing like he knew. And so he didn't seem to get deep into it the way like so many others did. And I will note that it was on his watch that Epstein went to jail. So again, I see Trump in that Luciferian faction, right? So, oh gosh, I got to go back to what I was saying about Musk. So Musk is goes to Apple, and they say, oh no, we won't get rid of it. And so then that puts Musk in this beautiful position, because if they allow the Twitter that goes after all the Molochian heels, banking, right? Banking and usury, and talking about gold and silver, there's tons of that. Musk actually would often retweet or respond to Wall Street silver. That person is now embroiled in a scandal, but it's beside the point. Silver and gold were boosted, and like Musk would sort of facilitate that by like retweeting Wall Street silver and other precious metals related folks. And so the banking thing is talked about openly. Achilles heel number one. The pedo stuff, actual child exploitation, suppressed under Musk, but talking about it allowed under Musk. It wasn't allowed prior to Musk. So that's two of the Achilles heel. And then the when Musk was faced with that choice, or I mean, rather when the Molochians and Apple were faced with that choice, they either keep the Twitter open, which means regular normies on their iPhone and their Android can see Twitter and therefore narrative breaking truth, right? That they don't want. And so they were thinking of getting rid of the app. But then when they thought about doing that, Musk goes, I'm just going to sidestep you. I'll create my phone. And they're like, oh, well, we control the phone lines. And he's like, I control the satellites, bro. Starlink. Game, set, match. So they're like, oh my God. Because people would eventually flock to the Musk phone. And Apple and Google make insane amounts of money from their apps. Absolutely mind-boggling. The App Store is far more profitable than the phones. They put the phones out so they can get their dipping their hand in that stream of all the apps. The app stores, that's where the money is. So Musk threatened to just go kaboom to that because some big percentage of people would go over to the Musk phone. And when people found out there was freedom of information on the Musk phone, they would go over there. And that means that the Apple Store and Google Store duopoly would be broken. And so they were like, oh my God, well, we can't do that. They had to allow Twitter on there. That's that Luciferian level thinking. So now I'm going to move on to the final section, which is about space. Okay. So this is highly speculative, and you're going to have to look up some information. And I have to be really careful with part of it. So first of all, one of the big things that Daniel List, aka Dark Journalist, talks about with the X-steganography and the X-tech, or what I call ultra tech, right, to describe just how woof it is, right, is that he notes that the X series of space planes, all of which have very unusual characteristics, some of which seem to have maneuverability capabilities like way beyond whatever, like the all-time fastest speed, I believe the all-time fastest speed record is still held by the SR-71 Blackbird. I might be wrong about that, but that's like an insane plane, and it had all kinds of like wild capabilities. And it seems that these X planes happen first, and then very often some of like the other like stealth bombers and other things kind of spin off of this program. But it's the X plane, especially the X space planes, that seem to carry this X-steganography, which shows it's that ultra tech, so anti-gravity, free energy kind of stuff seems to be related to it, and also the that Luciferian marker, right, of the X sigil. So right after the most recent election in 2022, the X-37B space plane came down from outer space. So what, Ian? Who cares? Well, that plane was up for 906, I think it was, days. I'll have the correct number down below. But it went up before the election of 2020, and it came down after the election of 2022. Okay? So if I'm right, this is very interesting. Now, you'll recall there were rumors and rumblings and stuff that seemed to have legs, including some amount of court case, but it was very quickly said, oh no, it's nothing to do with that. But there were guys who ended up getting arrested in Italy who worked for the Leonardo private Italian, Venetian-backed nobility link confirmed. That's probably a little bit of a reach, but also it's probably not, right? So, I mean, I don't have anyone to prove it, but fascinating that a private space company in Italy called Leonardo is putting up satellites, and their satellite was supposedly related in a hack related to the first of those two elections I mentioned. Okay, so that satellite's up there and it does naughty stuff, right? It does naughty stuff in 2020. And that came out quite a lot, actually. And there was a lot of talk, and there's been a lot of talk, that there's a series of like sting operations where people are compromised because it seems that, like, you know, for example, I think the NSA tends to lean more Luciferian, right? And the CIA leans Molochian, or mostly is. This doesn't mean everybody in both of those groups are that way. There's bad people, I'm sure, at NSA. There's probably even really good people at NSA. And same thing with CIA. I wouldn't be surprised if there's actually really good people who somehow resonate with the Most High and are somehow in those things. There's not going to be a lot of them in the power structures of either of those groups. And I feel that the power structure, CIA is clearly Molochian, and the power structure of NSA may be Luciferian. So when they turned on that data center in 2011, they suddenly had access to all the information live of all communications on Earth. And it was after that when it became much more mainstream to talk about the pedo thing. Came out a lot more, and a lot of stuff happened around pedo stuff after that event. So I'm just pointing out how this sort of thing manifests even within agencies within the US. There can be splits. And so there was talk that that space plane just came down, and I actually posited this to Dr. Joseph Rowe, and he agreed with me that it was a very intriguing possibility that might have legs. That X-37B space plane, its specialty is hacking and also grabbing satellites. And it was Space Force that was running that mission. Space Force was made by Trump. And it came back down to Florida about 5 to 10 days after the election. I'll flash up the correct date. And I think that they may have, like the NSA does, with all that information, and then can twist people's arms, right, and get them to turn and join the Luciferian faction, and tells them, okay, you stay in place, continue doing what you're doing. Or sometimes they would ask them to resign, probably do a psych profile and ask them to resign if they're not someone that the Luciferians can trust, that they can control. They have them resign. Remember all those CEOs resigning a few years ago, right before COVID happened, right? Things like that. Look for things like that. Also, for a while there was a lot of people who died of the sea, right? That was another thing that was showing that those people were either arrested or possibly were taken out in other ways. So they're using this information to twist people's arm. Now, if they did indeed grab satellites that are related to elections, they would have raw data that was unimpeachable, essentially, that they could then use to grab these people and twist their arm and then say, you stay in place and you just keep doing what you're doing. But when we give you that call and tell you it's go time, you follow our instructions no matter what they are. Or they force them out. So that particular link of an Italian private space agency that is hacking the events of 2020, right? Right? Very likely a Venetian black nobility link. There was also a lot of rumors of various arrests going on at the Vatican, and then not too long after it, Pope Francis said he's going to retire, which is fascinating and might be related to that. But the main thing is that if this space plane did indeed grab those, that could be a crucial turning point. And so that's it for this episode of Shadow Wars, Luciferians and Molochians. And thank you. And if you haven't already, please hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.